At that time, the Jews will finally be able to rebuild their temple. That is, when the Antichrist emerges with a false sense of peace that he will promote across the world. The Jews are already preparing to build that temple, and that will be the same temple that the Antichrist will later desecrate in the middle of the week. This will set into motion the seal and the trumpet judgments that we have studied thus far, judgments that will render the world almost uninhabitable. Over half of the population will die. In fact, the catastrophic consequences of even the first 4 seals are inconceivable. The Word of God tells us that it will kill 1/4 of the population. And yet Jesus tells us that this is only the beginning of birth pains. By the end, most of the human race will be exterminated. And even as labor pains increase in severity and frequency for a mother who is about to give birth, so too the seal and trumpet and bowl judgments will increase in severity and frequency until finally a glorious kingdom is born when the Messiah returns in all of his glory. Now, the chronology of Revelation 15 and 16 is the middle of the 7-year tribulation. It's in the middle of Daniel's 70th week. Just after the Antichrist has desecrated the Jewish temple and demanded that the world worship him, and now the effects of the 7th trumpet, which we read about in Daniel or in Revelation 11:15, are ready to occur. The 7 bowl judgments that will be poured out upon the world very rapidly. These will be judgments that recall 5 of the 10 plagues of God upon the Egyptians in Israel's first deliverance. We read about that in Exodus 7 through 10. And these bowl judgments that we will begin to study next week in chapter 16 will consist of loathsome and malignant sores on the beast worshipers, those who worship the Antichrist. The seas will be turned to blood. Everything in the seas will die. The same fate will befall the fresh waters and rivers and springs. The sun will scorch men with fierce heat. Darkness will encompass the earth. And the prophecy tells us that men will gnaw their tongues because of pain. The river Euphrates will dry up, allowing the kings of the east to be assembled. According to chapter 16, verse 14, for the war of the great day of God, the Almighty. And in verse 16, he says that that he gathers them together to the place which in Hebrew is called Har-Mageddon. And then the final bowl judgment will be the greatest earthquake in the history of the world. Huge hailstones, about 100 pounds, will come down from heaven upon men. Now, beloved, before these final plagues are unleashed upon the world, the Lord reveals to us a celestial prelude that we have before us this morning in chapter 15. He did the same thing just before the seal judgments in chapters 4 and 5, and even the trumpet judgments in chapter 8, verses 2 through 6. So what was warned and anticipated in chapter 14 regarding the fall of Babylon, which will be the empire of the Antichrist, and the judgment upon the beast worshipers, who will be made to drink of the wine of the wrath of God, all of that now is about to occur. But before it does, the Lord reveals this amazing vision to John in the first, or in these 8 verses of chapter 15. So again, I have entitled my discourse to you, A Celestial Prelude to the Last Plagues. And there are 4 themes that I believe emerge from the text before us that I wish to examine for a few minutes this morning. First, we will see a sign great and marvelous. Secondly, a sea of consuming fire. Thirdly, a song of triumph and deliverance. And finally, a sanctuary of holy vengeance. First, notice Notice a sign, great and marvelous in verse 1. And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels who had 7 plagues, which are the last, because in them the wrath of God is finished. Now, John has previously seen 2 other signs in heaven. In chapter 12, verses 1 and 3, there was the woman clothed in the sun, and we also saw the sign of the great fiery red dragon. But this sign, we read, is great and marvelous. What that means is that it is utterly amazing. It is that which causes absolute awe and wonder. Why? Because it points to the goal of these 7 angels, namely, to finish the wrath of God. Wrath indeed refers to his burning anger. It refers to his fury. It's a term in the original language that is used to describe the explosion of divine rage. Dear friends, this is the final phase of his wrath that began in the seal and the trumpet judgments. And now he is about to glorify himself by avenging his name through these 7 plagues, which are the last. That's very important, which are the last. They're last in chronological sequence. I might add that this refutes those who argue that God's wrath is reserved solely for the final stage of the tribulation, rather than that which has existed throughout the entirety of the 7 years, even in the seal and the trumpet judgments. These plagues are the climax of all of the rest. In fact, they comprise the 3rd woe that was predicted to come just after the 2nd woe is past in chapter 11, verse 14. Beloved, what is about to happen is great and marvelous because the unholy trinity of the dragon and of the beast and the false prophet, along with all who worship them, are about to be judged. As I think about it, John sees this, and now he's witnessing some of what he had heard about and read about in the Old Testament prophecies. Remember, Isaiah warned in chapter 2, verse 12, "For the Lord of hosts will have a day of reckoning against everyone who is proud and lofty, and against everyone who is lifted up, that he may be abased." And in chapter 13, verse 6, we read, "Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Therefore all hands will fall limp, and every man's heart will melt. They will be terrified. Pains and anguish will take hold of them." In Jeremiah chapter 30 and verse 7, we read, "Alas, for that day is great, there is none like it, and it is the time of Jacob's distress, but he will be saved from it." Indeed, God has promised to restore Israel unto himself. And in Ezekiel chapter 30 and verse 2, we read, "Wail, alas, for the day is near, even the day of the Lord is near. It will be a day of clouds, a time of doom for the nations." Oh, how I wish Bill O'Reilly could hear this and understand it and announce it. The prophet Zephaniah warned in chapter 1, verse 14, "Near is the great day of the Lord, near and coming very quickly. Listen, the day of the Lord. In it the warrior cries out bitterly. A day of wrath is that day, a day of trouble and distress, a day of destruction and desolation, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness, a day of trumpet and battle cry against the fortified cities and the high corner towers. And I will bring distress on men, so that they will walk like the blind, because they have sinned against the Lord. And their blood will be poured out like dust, and their flesh like dung. Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to deliver them on the day of the Lord's wrath. And all the earth will be devoured in the fire of his jealousy, for he will make a complete end, indeed a terrifying one, of all the inhabitants of the earth."